Welcome back, everybody, to Watching the Meta, the weekly series where I take my face and put it in the middle of a pie chart. And I guess we talk about some Magic Online metagame happenings from the weekend. Taking a look at first week of Aether Drift. This is a brand new set that just hit the digital shelves, and I gotta say, I'm a little impressed at how many cards made an impact, and I cannot wait to take a look at all of those sweet deck lists. We got a bunch of spicy ones here for you, more than usual, so I'm going to try to spend a little bit less time on each individual deck. But speaking of less time, we got a lot to cover, so let's just get right into it here with Modern. And format maybe doesn't look the best right now. If you are somebody who was maybe taking a little bit of a break from Modern because of recent formats like Nadu and Boros Energy with the One Ring and Scam and all this stuff, you might be familiar with some of these numbers. Running Breach at a whopping 19.8% of the metagame, and Boros Energy is not that far behind it at 18.4%. I mean, at least it's a 2-deck format instead of a 1-deck format. Really, though, Gruul Eldrazi taking a little bit of a dip down to 8%, and then everything else roughly about the same. Blink, roughly the same. There's a slight uptick in Amulet, slight uptick in Esper Oculus compared to Dimir Oculus. For example, Dimir was 5.1 last week, now it's 2.1. Esper was, looking on the sheet for last week on Esper, 1.6. This week it's 4.5. And there's a big reason why people are switching to Esper over Dimir. We'll get into that in a second. You can see the challenge winners, 3 Breach, 2 Amulet, and then Dimir, Esper, Gruul, and Boros accordingly. So that is the overall challenge metagame data for the weekend, but we are going to take a look at some spicy ones. And the first deck we're going to take a look at here is a Hollow One deck list featuring 4 copies of Marauding Mako. This is definitely one of the more impactful cards from the set. It's sort of a new copy of Flameblade Adept, and this particular list from Kaikas in 12th place, I really like this one. I've seen a lot of Rakdos lists that are only playing Mako, not Adept, and playing Nethergoyf instead as their second 1-drop. I really like leaning in and just playing 4 copies of Adept and 4 Makos because it makes you less reliant on the graveyard. So, granted, this list also has Vengevine, so maybe this is not exactly the way that I would build it, but I think the core concept of 4 Adept, 4 Mako, mono red with all the draw spells, I think is a really good approach and a very good way to start the deck building process. And just for posterity's sake, another Hollow One deck list here, but this one's a little bit different. So the previous one we saw was mono red. This one is actually splashing 2 different colors here for Orcish Bowmasters and Flage. It just so happens that both Bowmasters and Flage pretty good with Burning Inquiry, where you can cast Burning Inquiry with a Bowmasters in play to dome your opponent for 3, and Inquiry is also a card that helps you set up Flage. So if you're not interested in playing the Vengevine route, maybe this is an alternative way to go. Still have, well, actually this version has Channeler over Flameblade Adept, which I think makes sense if you're going to play Flage, because Channeler plus Bauble is a good way to fill the graveyard for Flage. Now, I did say there was a lot of Marauding Makos. I promise the card that I'm trying to highlight here is not Marauding Mako. This one is actually Monument to Endurance, a card that has been making waves in Standard, picking up in play rate and stuff like that. We'll get to that a little bit later, but it's very powerful, especially when combined with something like the Underworld Cookbook, where Cookbook plus Daredevil is a good way to discard, cards every single turn. It's a way to give you a free discard outlet, and that gets very powerful once you have Monument in play. Now, the issue with Monument is it is a little bit of a hefty investment. It's a 3-mana artifact in a format where you're dying on turn 2 or turn 3 to the Breach decks, so it's a little sketchy, specifically in that matchup. But the other cool thing is the Underworld Cookbook plus Marauding Mako, some more good synergy there, and kind of tying the room together, as you were. The glue that holds everything together is Faithless Looting, because it works so well with both Monument to Endurance and Marauding Mako, as well as being a discard outlet for Asmo, Inti, so on and so forth. So, if you're not into the Hollow One kind of stuff and you want to play some Urza Sagas, this might be a good avenue to do so. So really, the cards from Aether Drift that are seeing a lot of play in Modern, there's really 2 of them. We've talked about one of them. Let's talk about the other one. Ketchermos, the New Dawn. It's showing up in a couple of different spots. This one is definitely one of the more spicy ones that I saw, and somebody can quote me if I'm wrong in the comments section. I believe the first person I saw play this was Menguchi, and the idea here is there's a really sick combo. So Ketramos says whenever one or more cards are put into exile from graveyards and or the battlefield during your turn, you draw a card and lose a life. So you have Dark Blast, which is target creature gets -1/-1, but it's a 1 mana spell that has Dredge 3. That's really the important part about this. And then combined with Psychic Frog, where you have this cool engine where you're activating Psychic Frog to draw cards, but you can Dredge 3 to get the Dark Blast back. You can pitch 3 cards to the Psychic Frog to then trigger the Ketramos. The Ketramos draw, you can replace with Dark Blast. Dark Blast, you dredge, right, mill over 3, exile 3 to the Psychic Frog, and it kind of like is a self-fulfilling loop, which I thought was really cool. But even outside of that, you still have Leyline Binding as the main way to exile cards, but specifically Leyline Binding plus Psychic Frog, and Prismatic Ending to a lesser extent, all really cool cards together with Ketramos. And last but certainly not least, another place where we are seeing Ketramos show up a lot is the Oculus deck, because this deck has, again, Psychic Frog, so has a pretty good amount of already built-in ways to exile. The Oculus itself, when you're hardcasting it, you exile 6 cards from your graveyard. That'll trigger the Ketramos for you. These decks were already playing Nihil Spellbomb before, another pretty easy way to trigger the Ketramos. You have Prismatic Ending, you have Intimidation Tactics, so a bunch of different ways to trigger the Ketramos in the Oculus shell, and it also just happens to be a pretty good target for Unearth, where you kind of wanted another high-value Unearth target. Sometimes they were playing Graveyard Trespasser before, and I mean, Graveyard Trespasser, I will say, side note, does work pretty well with Ketramos, so maybe you want to play both of those, but it seems like a pretty significant upgrade to that previously maligned Pioneer All-Star Graveyard Trespasser. And speaking of Pioneer All-Stars, let us transition over to the Pioneer format, which, as we can see, is still pretty dominated by Rakdos, although I will say took a small bit of a decrease here from 23.8 to 17.5. Gruul kind of took the lion's share of the rest of that stuff, while going from 9.4 to 15%, so it seems to be a pretty neck-and-neck race between those two decks. I mean, Demon seems to be clearly out in front, but Gruul is definitely gaining some headway in that. As far as everything else is concerned, notables here, Dip and Atarka Red, a pretty sizable increase in Dimir Bounce from 4.4 to 9.4. Not sure if they necessarily got any new cards. I guess I've seen Grim Bauble and sometimes Momentum Breaker, although I'm not sure how much of a game changer that one is. So I don't know if that's new cards or people just trying out new decks. Phoenix, mostly the same. Burn, slight uptick, but nothing else noteworthy over here with the exception of the increase in Bounce in Gruul and the slight decrease in Demons. But as far as Aether Drift is concerned, it is making some waves in Pioneer, and we are going to start by taking a look at this really, really sweet Ketramos Crimes deck. Now, I tried some Ketramos Crimes. I only tried Orzhov myself in Standard. I haven't tried them out in Pioneer yet. But this particular list from Fletcher Pullup in 31st place is pretty interesting because it has a light green splash for Free Strider Lookout, which is kind of this glue that holds the crime decks together. It's like probably the single best crime payoff, where if you have cards like Ghost Vacuum and Scrabbling Claws to consistently trigger crimes. The really, really cool thing that I like about the interaction between Ketramos and Crimes, specifically, we don't have Scrabbling Claws in Standard, we only have Ghost Vacuum, but they're, for all intents and purposes, similar cards. These cards really tie the room together they kind of bridge the gap between the Ketramoses and the crime payoffs, because like the Ghost Vacuum exiles cards for Ketramos and it also commits crimes. So it's a very good enabler at doing both of those things. So you kind of get to sort of kill two birds with one stone if you play Ketramos plus crimes, where you have Lookout, Ketramos, those enablers, and then from there it's just a mid-range deck, right? You have kill spells like Fatal Push, Thoughtseize, Vanishing Verse is a really cool addition to trigger Ketramos. Big payoff here as far as mana base is concerned. You can go find Restless Cottage, which is another way to trigger Ketramos. So a lot of cool stuff going on here. And maybe looking at this now, maybe there's also a Standard build coming up. YouTube video soon? Okay, there's a lot to talk about with this one, and I saw this deck from Coco7721 in 28th place 28th place, meaning the record was probably not fantastic, but alas, we have to show this one off. So, if you don't remember this little card called Soul Flayer is basically a delve card, and you gain all of the abilities of creatures that you exile with it. So the idea is to find creatures that have a lot of keywords. So Zetalpa has 5 of them, Atraxa has 4 of them. You see where this is going, right? Sylvan Curated to provide hexproof, so on and so forth. So that's your plan A, right? Plan B is you can, even if you have a Soul Flayer with no good abilities on it, you can then Eldritch Evolution the Soul Flayer and go get Atraxa. Well, what if I told you we had Plan C and I guess maybe even Plan D/E, where if you have a 2-mana creature in play, right, Rafine's Informant or Sylvan Curated, you can cast Eldritch Evolution because X is, remember, search your library for a creature with mana value X, where X is 2 plus the sacrificed creature's mana value. So you can sacrifice a 2 to go get a 4-drop. Well, it just so happens we have a pretty good new 4-drop here in the form of Brightglass Gearhulk, which is First Strike Trample, and you get to search for 2 things. Could be artifacts, creatures, or enchantments. So the really funny line here is you can go Evolution, sacrifice a 2, go get Brightglass Gearhulk, and then you can Gearhulk for the 1 Colossus Hammer and the 1 Sigarda's Aid. And then on the following turn, you can play both of those and attack them with a 14/14 First Strike Trample. I don't know if it's genius, I don't know if it's psychotic, but I had to show it to you guys, and now that I've put that nugget of wisdom out there, maybe you can go do something with that yourself. Not a ton of new cards here in this one from Shorts MTG in 11th place, but this is a Boros Legends deck, which is something that I have worked on myself a ton in the past because we don't have a lot of free mana in Pioneer. Really, this is the only one in the form of Mox Amber, and anytime there is a new playable 1-mana creature that gets printed that happens to be a legend, everybody's got to go back and take a look at it. And that is exactly what we're doing with this, where you have Basri, Tomorrow's Champion, not the most effective card. You can exert it to make a 1/1, you can cycle it and give your cats indestructible hexproof. Most of the time, this is a vanilla 1-mana 2/1 that has a legendary super type, or whatever type. Is it subtype, super type? Let me know in the comments. But the only important part about this is it is a legendary 1-mana creature that turns on Mox Amber. And that does matter, because now you have access to Skrelv, Kithian, and Basri. Now, the reason that that's so important is before you had to play red creatures like Zergo or Norin from Duskmourn, but now you can concentrate all of your 1-drops into the color white. And that's important because you have a lot of double white cards, specifically Adeline, that you want to cast on turn 2, and the mana gets a little awkward when you have red creature plus Mox Amber. So definitely something to consider, and this list looks pretty clean. And last up here from Cute Chandra 19 in 7th place, so we get a nice little top 8 here. Viewers of this series may remember this username from, I want to say it was a couple of weeks ago, when we featured their goblins list, and they're back at it again, this time with new goblins. So Grease Wrench is perfect in this deck. It has the Exhaust ability, which you can use once while it's in play, and you can discard up to 2 cards and draw that many cards, put a counter on this creature. Now, why that's important is because before, you were trying to set up Raise the Past, which is an extremely powerful card if you can pair it with sacrifice outlets like Skirk Prospector. You don't always have the sacrifice outlets, so you need ways to fuel the bin cards into the graveyard to set up your Raise the Past. You had Fable the Mirror Breaker, which is, for what it's worth, a phenomenal way to do that. But now that you have an additional way to do that in the form of Grease Wrench Goblin, which is also a goblin, which means it synergizes with the turn, like you're sacrificing and going off and all that stuff, it's kind of perfect. So definitely something to consider with this kind of Grease Wrench, Raise the Past, Fable combo Goblins deck. And this one looks pretty good. And I think this is a very, very good starting point. And last, but certainly not least, quite possibly the format that was impacted the most by Aether Drift, and that is Standard. And oh boy, what happened? Why did everybody decide to play Domain this weekend? Well, I guess it's good that people were off Pixie a little bit. We went from 18 to 12. That's a good sign. Gruul Prowess, slight uptick. This is, I think, the first time that I've ever seen a pie chart that didn't have Pixie in first. So that's good news. Although it comes at the cost of Domain being 21%. I don't really know what happens with the Magic Online metagame these days. I feel like people just pick a deck that everybody wants to collectively play for a weekend. Maybe it's just that Domain punishes all of the silly players who are trying to try on their new cool cards. That could be it, something like that. But alas, Domain at 21% took a lot out of the Dimir. Look at Dimir bounce from 10 to 1.6. That's kind of unreal. Dimir mid-range, slight downtick. Golgari, slight downtick. I mean, when you see Domain go from 8 to 21, everything else is going to be down, right? With the exception of Jeskai Convoke, which did get a couple of new tools, namely Nesting Bot and the Boros Verge. So, got a couple of upgrades there. Most everything else is roughly around the same, nothing too crazy. But yeah, look at the difference between Domain between last week and this week. But we do have a lot of interesting decks to talk about. And we are going to start off with Cubs win in 19th place. Well, because they're in 19th place, I guess the Cubs didn't win this year. But this one, the first card that I want to highlight from Aether Drift here, which you may not see a lot of the cards that you've seen before in Standard, because again, the format's a little bit lower power level, is more chance for different cards to succeed in their respective elements. And the first one that I want to showcase to you guys is Duretti Rocketeer Engineer. And this little creature is a star 5 and has power equal to the greatest mana value among artifacts you control. And whenever it attacks or enters the battlefield, you get to basically weld, which is return an artifact from your graveyard to play, sacrifice an artifact. And there's a lot of cool stuff going on here. So you have a lot of discard outlets to help set that up. Namely, Saheeli's Lattice is the most important one because it is an artifact that stays in the battlefield, and it also says discard 1, draw 2. That is massive for this deck. Not just Duretti, but you also have another new card in the form of Tune Up, where you have 2 just giant reanimate big artifacts in the same set. So this is kind of a deck that we really didn't have access to before Aether Drift. We had reanimator strategies with Zombify and things like that, but nothing that was just getting back, because you might ask yourself, what are you getting back if you're trying to get all these big artifacts? A couple of different ones here. Threefold Thunder Hulk, which is just a lot of power spread out across a number of different bodies. Portal to Phyrexia, which is they sack 3 things and you have just a Debtor's Knell in play. And Nexus of Becoming, which is kind of cool because it's the perfect mix of good reanimation target, but also reasonably castable at 6 mana, especially when you figure into the mix that you have Seize the Spoils to ramp you. So a lot of cool stuff going on here. Maybe look out for a YouTube video, potentially. I played it yesterday. Hopefully that'll be up soon. Oh boy, speaking of new cards, do I have some new cards for you. This is as close as you're going to get to Aether Drift Block Constructed from Soggy Cheerios in 13th place. This is a deck I've seen pop up a couple of times. And you might ask yourself, what's going on here? And I'm here to explain that. So the deck is centered around the card Radiant Lotus, which is a new powerful card from Aether Drift. It basically lets you sacrifice any number of artifacts to basically turn all of your artifacts into Black Lotuses. So if you have 7 artifacts, you sack them all, make 21 mana. Now, you might notice that there's only 2 copies of the Lotus, but you effectively have 6 copies because you're cheating on that a little bit with Repurposing Bay, which can go up the chain and help you find the pieces more consistently. So what you're trying to assemble is you're trying to get a Lotus into play, make a whole bunch of mana, and then have access to Boommobile, whether that be in the form of Repurposing Bay, sacrificing to go get it, or just having it in your hand. And once you have a boatload of mana, you just play the Boommobile and fireball your opponent. It's pretty simple. The other ways that you have to set up and find your pieces are Collector's Vault, which is a perfect way to draw discard and make treasures and ramp you a little bit, make more fodder for the Radiant Lotus later on. Same thing with Satchel, where this is a cool 4-mana card that just provides a lot of artifacts for the Lotus. And yeah, you can go up the chain with Mightstone and Weakstone. This is the one you want to be sacrificing to go get the Lotus with the Repurposing Bay. You have Pit Automaton, which does kind of this like weirdo Enigma Jewel impression, because you only are allowed to play 4 Enigma Jewels. Sadly, I know. And you have some Forging the Anchors, which a lot of people forget that this card is legal, but it's just 3 mana draw 5 in an artifact deck? I mean, there's 35 artifacts. So you're going to hit pretty consistently with this, at least 3 cards. And yeah, this is a powerful card that I feel like a lot of people are maybe sleeping on. Okay, there is a little bit of overlap here with Monument to Endurance. For those of you who didn't see, I'm recording this on Tuesday. I uploaded a video with this deck yesterday. Definitely go check that out if you haven't yet. And yeah, what's going on here is you are trying to utilize the synergy between Monument to Endurance, which pays you off for discarding cards, and Artist Talent, which whenever you cast a non-creature spell, you can discard a card, draw a card. So Artist Talent really wants you to have a bunch of cheap spells. So you'll notice we have 4 copies of Opt, 4 Torch the Tower, and 4 Sleight of Hand, along with, I believe, yeah, this list had 1 Burst Lightning. So, what, 4, 8, 12, 13 1-mana spells to power out the synergy between Talent and Monument. You have Trainer to find your combo pieces. You can find either Monument or Talent with this card. And then you kind of have this backup plan of Talent plus Town, where you want to, again, Talent is another 1-mana spell that triggers Artist Talent. So actually it's 17. But the interaction between Talent and Town is so powerful, especially when you have Artist Talent in play, where when you're going through that loop, you're then churning through your deck, you'll eventually find the Monument, and then from there you can kind of pop off. One really cool interaction that I haven't seen come up super often, but I just want to make you aware of this if you decide to play this deck, which I did mention in the video. But if you have a Monument in play, let's say you've exhausted all 3 of the abilities on it and you want to discard some more cards, if you Town to mount your Monument and then recast it, that resets the Monument for the turn. Just keep that in mind if you're playing this deck, because that is a really, really cool synergy. Not a ton to talk about with this one, because this is really just the Dimir deck from 6 months ago with 4 Oil Deep Gearhulk. Just wanted to shout it out because this one did top 8 a challenge. And I mean, it's a lot of what you would expect. Bats, Curiosities, Mockingbirds, Preachers, even shaving a Spyglass Siren, kill spells, blue-black lands. But it seems like the non-bounce players are really interested in playing 4 Oil Deep Gearhulks, even in addition to Shieldred. I wasn't sure if they would just cut Shelly entirely, but this version is playing 6 4-drops. Not sure if that's the amount that I would want to be playing, but just wanted to put it out there. Oh, wait a minute, I'm sorry, they're playing 9 4-drops. My mistake, okay. Yeah, that's a lot of 4-drops. I don't know if I would do that, but it worked out for them. 8th place, Oil Deep Gearhulk. This is one I want to know your guys' opinion in the comments, because I've heard a lot of different things about Oil Deep Gearhulk. If you're a Dimir player, are you interested in playing this card? Let me know in the comments. And last but certainly not least, if you made it all the way till the end of the video, you get to see some goblins in action, which another deck that I played yesterday on stream. Look out for a YouTube video on the horizon, maybe. And I gotta tell you, this deck was phenomenal. So there's a couple of new cards here in the form of Burnout Bastronaut, which is one very important part about this card that I didn't realize like how important it was before, is it is a 1-mana creature that starts your engines and has Menace, which is some form of evasion. So you play it on turn 1 if you're on the play. If your opponent doesn't kill it, you're guaranteed to be at speed 2, because they obviously can't block it on turn 1. And what's nice about that is because you're playing with 4 copies of Howl Squad Heavy, and this is a card that the ceiling increases on it so much the faster you get to 4 speed, because then you just have this ability to make an obscene amount of mana. It's better than it looks, I will say that. I know this deck doesn't look fantastic on paper, but that synergy between Burnout and Heavy, just unbelievable. And you get to play 4 Krenko Mob Boss because the Heavy gives it haste. Even if you don't have full speed, you still get haste on the Krenko with Heavy, which is phenomenal. You're playing a bunch of Lords with Horde Master and Dropkick Bomber. And yeah, just some Soul Stones, clean, 4 Torch the Tower, all creatures, a couple of Volley Veterans to help kill creatures. You have Seer Slicer to go wide, and I don't know, we were just beating up on Pixie players yesterday, so maybe there's something here. And that is going to do it for another episode of Watching the Meta. I really appreciate you guys tuning in. Thank you for making it all the way to the end of the video. If you liked what you see, give the video a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel. Be sure to let me know what you thought in the comment section down below. And until next week, adios.